Sarah and her friend Luke are crazy about space. Last year, for a costume party, Sarah dressed as an astronaut and Luke dressed up as the moon. You might not be as space crazy as Sarah and Luke, but did you know that many objects in space affect us here on Earth? Like, what about the satellites we use every day to make our cell phones work? Satellites in low Earth orbit zip around our planet at about 4.72 miles per second. Pretty speedy, huh? So, when Luke sends Sarah a text message, the satellite that relays the message travels 16.52 miles before Sarah gets the message. Can you figure out how long it took the text to go from Luke's phone to Sarah's phone? Let's see how dividing decimals can help us to find out. How can you use a decimal grid to model decimal division? Use a model to find the quotient of 6.39 and 3 to find the quotient of 6.39 and 2.13. Remember that a decimal grid has 100 squares. Each square represents 1/100th. To model 1 or 100 hundredths, shade an entire grid. To model 0.5 or 50 hundredths, shade half of the grid, or 50 squares. To model 13 hundredths, shade 13 squares. To find 6 and 39 hundredths divided by 3 using decimal grids, first shade grids to show 6 and 39 hundredths. Let's start by shading 6 whole grids. Now let's shade 39 hundredths of another grid. Since each square of the grid is 1/100th, we can shade 39 squares. These grids show 6 and 39 hundredths shaded. To find the quotient of 6 and 39 hundredths and 3, we'll separate the shaded squares into 3 equal groups. First, let's separate the 6 whole grids into 3 equal groups. Next, let's separate the 39 hundredths into 3 equal groups. Count the wholes and the hundredths to find how many are in each group. Let's find out how many are in each group. There are 2 and 13 hundredths in each group. So what is the quotient of 6 and 39 hundredths and 3? Since there are 2 and 13 hundredths in each group in the model, 6 and 39 hundredths divided by 3 is 2 and 13 hundredths. You can also use the decimal grids to find the quotient of 6 and 39 hundredths and 2 and 13 hundredths. It is difficult to divide the grid into 2 and 13 hundredths groups, so let's separate the model into groups of 2 and 13 hundredths instead. Now we can count how many equal groups we have. There are 1, 2, 3 groups. So how many groups do you have? You have 3 groups. So what is 6 and 39 hundredths divided by 2 and 13 hundredths? The quotient 6 and 39 hundredths divided by 2 and 13 hundredths is 3. Margot paid $39 for 8 tubes of oil paint. About how much did each tube cost? To solve the problem, let's divide using long division. Remember that the dividend is the number you're dividing. The divisor is the number you're dividing by. And the quotient is your answer. If a dividend is not evenly divisible by a divisor, you may be able to write the quotient as a decimal. Since 39 is not evenly divisible by 8, put a decimal point in the quotient and directly below it in the dividend. As you divide, add zeros to the right of the decimal point as you need them. This does not change the value of the dividend. Let's finish the division. Money amounts are measured to the hundredths of a dollar, so let's round the decimal to hundredths. So each tube of paint costs about $4.88. In the last example, you divided a whole number by a whole number and the quotient was a decimal. Let's look at a problem where you divide a decimal by a whole number. A school track is 9.76 meters wide. It is divided into 8 lanes of equal width. How wide is each lane? To solve the problem, let's use long division just like we did with whole numbers. Here we are dividing a decimal by a whole number. Don't pay attention to the decimal point for now. Let's divide. 8 goes into 9 one time with a remainder of 1. 8 goes into 17 two times with a remainder of 1. And 8 goes into 16 evenly 2 times. Once you've divided, you can place the decimal point in the quotient. The decimal point in the quotient goes directly above the decimal point in the dividend. Drag the decimal point to the correct spot. That's right. The decimal point goes between the 1 and the 2 in the quotient. How can you divide by decimals? Every smoothie sold contains 0.5 cup of raspberries. How many smoothies can be sold using 3.25 cups of raspberries? When you multiply both the dividend and the divisor of a quotient by the same power of 10, the quotient does not change. 8 divided by 4 is the same as 80 divided by 40. 8 divided by 4 is also the same as 800 divided by 400, and therefore the same as 80 divided by 40. When you divide a number by a decimal, first change the divisor to a whole number by multiplying it by a power of 10. Let's choose a power of 10 to multiply 0.5 by to make it a whole number. Excellent! You need to multiply 0.5 by 10 to get the whole number 5. You have to multiply the dividend by the same power of 10. Great job! 3.25 multiplied by 10 is 32.5. Now let's divide. Remember, the quotient of 32.5 and 5 is the same as the quotient of 3.25 and 0.5. How many times does 5 go into 32? Enter the factor. You're right. 5 goes into 32 6 times. Let's continue dividing. How many times does 5 go into 25? Enter your answer. Great! 5 goes into 25 5 times. Don't forget to place the decimal point in the quotient directly above where the decimal point is in the dividend. Drag the decimal point to the correct spot. Correct. That's where the decimal point goes. So 6 smoothies can be sold since you cannot sell half a smoothie. Now let's practice with the personal math trainer.